Forward. The form of this treatise would have been, on the one hand, more strictly scientific, on the other hand, in many of its arguments, less pedantic, if its primary purpose had not been that of a doctor's dissertation. I am nevertheless constrained by external reasons to send it to the press in this form. Moreover, I believe that I have solved in it a heretofore unsolved problem in the history of Greek philosophy. The experts know that no preliminary studies that are even of the slightest use exist for the subject of this treatise. What Cicero and Plutarch have babbled has been babbled after them up to the present day. Gassendi, who freed Epicurus from the interdict which the fathers of the church in the whole Middle Ages, the period of realized unreason, had placed upon him, presents in his expositions only one interesting element. He seeks to accommodate his Catholic conscience to his pagan knowledge and Epicurus to the church, which certainly was wasted effort. It is as though one wanted to throw the habit of a Christian nun over the bright and flourishing body of the Greek laity. It is rather that Gassendi learns philosophy from Epicurus than that he could teach us about Epicurus's philosophy. This treatise is to be regarded only as the preliminary to a larger work in which I shall present in detail the cycle of Epicurean, Stoic and Skeptic philosophy and their relation to the whole of Greek speculation. The shortcomings of this treatise in form and the like will be eliminated in that later work. To be sure, Hegel has on the whole correctly defined the general aspects of the above-mentioned systems. But in the admirably great and bold plan of his history of philosophy, from which alone the history of philosophy can in general be dated, it was impossible, on the one hand, to go into detail. And on the other hand, the giant thinker was hindered by his view of what he called speculative thought par excellence from recognizing in these systems their great importance for the history of Greek philosophy and for the Greek mind in general. These systems are the key to the true history of Greek philosophy. A more profound indication of their connection with Greek life can be found in the essay of my friend KPP N. Friedrich der Grosse und sein Widersacher. If a critique of Plutarch's polemic against Epicurus's theology has been added as an appendix, this is because this polemic is by no means isolated but rather representative of an ESPC, in that it most strikingly presents in itself the relation of the theologizing intellect to philosophy. The critique does not touch, among other things, on the general falsity of Plutarch's standpoint when he brings philosophy before the forum of religion. In this respect, it will be enough to cite, in place of all argument, a passage from David Hume. "'Tis certainly a kind of indignity to philosophy whose sovereign authority ought everywhere to be acknowledged, to oblige her on every occasion to make apologies for her conclusions which may be offended at her. This puts one in mind of a king arraigned for high treason against his subjects. Philosophy, as long as a drop of blood shall pulse in its world-subduing and absolutely free heart, will never grow tired of answering its adversaries with the cry of Epicurus. Not the man who denies the gods worshipped by the multitude, but he who affirms of the gods what the multitude believes about them, is truly impious. Philosophy makes no secret of it. The confession of Prometheus, in simple words, I hate the pack of gods, is its own confession, its own aphorism against all heavenly and earthly gods who do not acknowledge human self-consciousness as the highest divinity. It will have none other beside. But to those poor March hares who rejoice over the apparently worsened civil position of philosophy, it responds again, as Prometheus replied to the servant of the gods Hermes. Be sure of this, I would not change my state of evil fortune for your servitude. Better to be the servant of this rock than to be faithful boy to Father Zeus. I bid. Prometheus is the most eminent saint and martyr in the philosophical calendar. Berlin, March 1841. Part 1. Difference between the democritean and epicurean philosophy of nature in general. The subject of the treatise. Greek philosophy seems to have met with something with which a good tragedy is not supposed to meet, namely a dull ending. The objective history of philosophy in Greece seems to come to an end with Aristotle, Greek philosophy's Alexander of Macedon. And even the manly strong Stoics did not succeed in what the Spartans did accomplish in their temples, the chaining of Athena to Heracles, so that she could not flee. Epicurean, Stoics, and skeptics are regarded as an almost improper addition bearing no relation to its powerful premises. Epicurean philosophy is taken as a syncretic combination of democritean physics and Cyrenaic morality. Stoicism as a compound of Heraclitean speculation on nature and the cynical ethical view of the world together with some Aristotelian logic, and finally skepticism as the necessary evil confronting these dogmatisms. These philosophies are thus unconsciously linked to the Alexandrian philosophy by being made into a one-sided and tendentious eclecticism. The Alexandrian philosophy is finally regarded entirely as exaltation and derangement to confusion, in which at most the universality of the intention can be recognized. To be sure, it is a commonplace that birth, flowering, and decline constitute the iron circle in which everything human is enclosed, through which it must pass. Thus it would not have been surprising if Greek philosophy, after having reached its zenith in Aristotle, should then have withered. But the death of the hero resembles the setting of the sun, not the bursting of an inflated frog. And then, birth, flowering, and decline are very general, very vague notions under which, to be sure, everything can be arranged, but through which nothing can be understood. Decay itself is prefigured in the living, its shape should therefore be just as much grasped in its specific characteristic as the shape of life. Finally, when we glance at history, are Epicureanism, Stoicism, and skepticism particular phenomena? Are they not the prototypes of the Roman mind, the shape in which Greece wandered to Rome? Is not their essence so full of character, so intense and eternal that the modern world itself has to admit them to full spiritual citizenship? I lay stress on this only in order to call to mind the historical importance of these systems. Here, however, we are not at all concerned with their significance for culture in general, but with their connection with the older Greek philosophy. Should not this relationship urge us, at least to an inquiry, to see Greek philosophy ending up with two different groups of eclectic systems, one of them the cycle of Epicurean, Stoic, and skeptic philosophy, the other being classified under the collective name of Alexandrian speculation? Furthermore, is it not remarkable that after the Platonic and Aristotelian philosophies, which are universal in range, there appear new systems which do not lean on these rich intellectual forms, but look farther back and have recourse to the simplest schools, to the philosophers of nature in regard to physics, to the Socratic school in regard to ethics? Moreover, what is the reason why the systems that follow after Aristotle find their foundations as it were ready-made in the past, why Democritus is linked to the Cyrenaics and Heraclitus to the Cynics? Is it an accident that with the Epicureans, Stoics, and skeptics, all moments of self-consciousness are represented completely, but every moment as a particular existence? Is it an accident that these systems in their totality form the complete structure of self-consciousness? And finally, the character with which Greek philosophy mythically begins in the Seven Wise Men, and which is, so to say, as its central point, embodied in Socrates as its demiurge, I mean the character of the wise man of the Sophos. Is it an accident that it is asserted in those systems as the reality of true science? It seems to me that though the earlier systems are more significant and interesting for the content, the post-Aristotelian ones, and primarily the cycle of the Epicurean, Stoic, and skeptic schools, are more significant and interesting for the subjective form, the character of Greek philosophy. But it is precisely the subjective form, the spiritual carrier of the philosophical systems, which has until now been almost entirely ignored in favor of their metaphysical characteristics. I shall save for a more extensive discussion the presentation of the Epicurean, Stoic, and skeptic philosophies as a whole, and in their total relationship to earlier and later Greek speculation. Let it suffice here to develop this relationship as it were by an example, and only in one aspect, namely their relationship to earlier speculation. As such an example, I select the relationship between the Epicurean and the Democritean philosophy of nature. I do not believe that it is the most convenient point of contact. Indeed, on the one hand, it is an old and entrenched prejudice to identify Democritean and Epicurean physics, so that Epicurus's modifications are seen as only arbitrary vagaries. On the other hand, I am forced to go into what seem to be microscopic examinations as far as details are concerned. But precisely because this prejudice is as old as the history of philosophy, because the differences are so concealed that they can be discovered as it were only with a microscope, it will be all the more important if, despite the interdependence of democritean and epicurean physics, an essential difference extending to the smallest details can be demonstrated. What can be demonstrated in the small can even more easily be shown where the relations are considered in larger dimensions, while conversely very general considerations leave doubt whether the result will hold when applied to details. Opinions on the relationship between democritean and epicurean physics. The way in which my general outlook is related to earlier points of view will become quite obvious if a brief review is made of the opinions held by the ancient authors concerning the relationship between democritean and epicurean physics. Posidonius the Stoic, Nicolaus and Socian reproach Epicurus for having presented the democritean doctrine of atoms and Aristippus' teaching on pleasure as his own. Cotta the academician asks in Cicero, what is there in Epicurus' physics which does not belong to Democritus? True, he modifies some details, but most of it he repeats after him. Cicero himself says similarly. In physics, where he is the most pretentious, Epicurus is a perfect stranger. Most of it belongs to Democritus. Where he deviates from him, where he endeavors to improve, he spoils and worsens it. Although many authors reproach Epicurus for aspersions against Democritus, Leontius, according to Plutarch, affirms on the contrary that Epicurus honored Democritus because the latter had adhered to the true doctrine before him, because he had discovered the principles of nature earlier. In the essay De Placitis Philosophorum, Epicurus is called one who philosophizes after the manner of Democritus. Plutarch in his Colotes goes further, successively comparing Epicurus with Democritus, Empedocles, Parmenides, Plato, Socrates, Stilpo. The Cyrenaics and the academicians he seeks to prove that Epicurus appropriated from the whole of Greek philosophy the false and did not understand the true. Likewise the treatise de Eo, quod secundum Epicurum non beats vivi possit teams, with inimical insinuations of a similar kind. In the Fathers of the Church we find this unfavorable opinion held by the more ancient authors maintained. In the note I quote only one passage from Clement of Alexandria, a father of the Church who deserves to be prominently mentioned with regard to Epicurus, since he reinterprets the warning of the Apostle Paul against philosophy in general into a warning against Epicurean philosophy, as one which did not even once spin fantasies concerning providence and the like. But how common was the tendency to accuse Epicurus of plagiarism is shown most strikingly by Sextus Empiricus, who wishes to turn some quite inappropriate passages from Homer and Epicharmus into principal sources of Epicurean philosophy. It is well known that the more recent writers by and large make Epicurus, insofar as he was a philosopher of nature, a mere plagiarist of Democritus. The following statement of Leibniz may here represent their opinion in general. Of this great man, Democritus, we scarcely know anything but what Epicurus borrowed from him, and Epicurus was not capable of always taking the best. Thus, while Cicero says that Epicurus worsened the Democritean doctrine, at the same time crediting him at least with the will to improve it and with having an eye for its defects, while Plutarch ascribes to him inconsistency, a predisposition toward the inferior, hence also casts suspicion on his intentions. Leibniz denies him even the ability to make excerpts from Democritus skillfully. But all agree that Epicurus borrowed his physics from Democritus, when they had now put aside all longing for drinking and eating. And as to death, that, it is nothing to us. Epicharmus had already pointed this out to him when he said, to die or to he dead concerns me not. So too he stole the notion that dead bodies have no feeling from Homer, where he writes, this dumb day that he beats with abuse in his violent fury. Difficulties concerning the identity of the Democritean and Epicurean philosophy of nature. Apart from historical testimony, there is much other evidence for the identity of Democritean and Epicurean physics. The principles, atoms and the void, are indisputably the same. Only in isolated cases does there seem to be arbitrary, hence unessential, difference. However, a curious and insoluble riddle remains. Two philosophers teach exactly the same science in exactly the same way, but how inconsistent. They stand diametrically opposed in all that concerns truth, certainty, application of this science, and all that refers to the relationship between thought and reality in general. I say that they stand diametrically opposed, and I shall now try to prove it. A. The opinion of Democritus concerning the truth and certainty of human knowledge seems hard to ascertain. Contradictory passages are to be found, or rather it is not the passages, but Democritus' views that contradict each other. For Trendelenburg's assertion in his commentary to Aristotelian psychology that only later authors, but not Aristotle, knew of such contradictions is factually incorrect. Indeed, in Aristotle's psychology it is stated, Democritus posits soul and mind as one and the same, since the phenomenon is the true thing. But in his metaphysics he writes, Democritus asserts that nothing is true or it is concealed from us. Are not these passages of Aristotle contradictory? If the phenomenon is the true thing, how can the true thing be concealed? The concealment begins only when phenomenon and truth separate. But Diogenes Laertius reports that Democritus was counted among the skeptics. His saying is quoted, in reality we know nothing, for truth lies at the deep bottom of the well. Similar statements are found in Sextus Empiricus. This skeptical, uncertain, and internally self-contradictory view held by Democritus is only further developed in the way in which the relationship between the atom and the world, which is apparent to the senses, is determined. Sensuous appearance on the one hand does not belong to the atoms themselves. It is not objective appearance but subjective semblance. The true principles are the atoms and the void, everything else is opinion. Semblance. 5. Cold exists only according to opinion, heat exists only according to opinion, but in reality there are only the atoms and the void. 6. Unity therefore does not truly result from the many atoms, but rather, through the combination of atoms each thing appears to become a unity. 7. The principles can therefore be perceived only through reason, since they are inaccessible to the sensuous eye, if only because of their smallness. For this reason they are even called ideas. The sensuous appearance is, on the other hand, the only true object, and the isis is the phronesis. This true thing, however, is the changing, the unstable, the phenomenon. But to say that the phenomenon is the true thing is contradictory. 9. Thus now the one, now the other side is made the subjective, and the objective. The contradiction therefore seems to be held apart, being divided between two worlds. Consequently, Democritus makes sensuous reality into subjective semblance, but the antinomy, banned from the world of objects, now exists in his own self-consciousness, where the concept of the atom and sensuous perception face each other as enemies. Thus Democritus does not escape the antinomy. This is not yet the place to explain it. It is enough that we cannot deny its existence. Now let us listen to Epicurus. The wise man, he says, takes a dogmatic, not a skeptical position. 10. Yes, exactly this makes him superior to all the others, that he knows with conviction. 11. All senses are heralds of the true. 12. Nor is there anything which can refute sensations, neither like can refute like because of their equal validity, nor can unlike refute unlike, because they do not pass judgment on the same thing, nor the concept, because the concept depends on the sensuous perceptions. 13, as it says in the canon. But while Democritus turns the sensuous world into subjective semblance, Epicurus turns it into objective appearance. And here he differs, quite consciously, since he claims that he shares the same principles but that he does not reduce the sensuous qualities to things of mere opinion. Since therefore sensation was in fact Epicurus' standard, since objective appearance corresponds to it, then we can only regard as a correct conclusion that at which Cicero shrugs his shoulder. The sun seems large to Democritus, because he is a man of science well versed in geometry. To Epicurus it seems to be about 2 feet large, for he pronounces it as large as it seems. 15. In the theoretical judgments of Democritus and Epicurus concerning the certainty of science and the truth of its objects manifests itself in the disparate scientific energy and practice of these men. Democritus, for whom the principle does not enter into the appearance, remains without reality and existence, is faced on the other hand with the world of sensation as the real world, full of content. True, this world is subjective semblance, but just because of this it is torn away from the principle, left in its own independent reality. At the same time, it is the unique real object and as such has value and significance. Democritus is therefore driven into empirical observation. Dissatisfied with philosophy, he throws himself into the arms of positive knowledge. We have already seen that Cicero calls him a vieire eruditus. He is versed in physics, ethics, mathematics, in the encyclopedic disciplines, in every art. The catalogue alone of his books given by Diogenes Laertius bears witness to his erudition. 17. But since it is the characteristic trait of erudition to expand in breadth and to collect and to search on the outside, we see Democritus wandering through half the world in order to acquire experiences, knowledge, and observations. I have among my contemporaries, he prides himself, wandered through the largest part of the earth, investigating the remotest things. I have seen most climates and lands, and I have heard most learned men, and in linear composition with demonstration no one surpassed me, not even the so-called Arsapedonaps of the Egyptians. 18. Demetrius in the Homonimoa and Antisthenes in the Diadochi report that he traveled to Egypt to the priests in order to learn geometry, and to the Chaldeans in Persia, and that he reached the Red Sea. Some maintain that he also met the Gymnosophists in India and set foot in Ethiopia. On the one hand, it is the lust for knowledge that leaves him no rest, but it is at the same time dissatisfaction with true, i.e., philosophical, knowledge that drives him far abroad. The knowledge which he considers true is without content. The knowledge that gives him content is without truth. It could he a fable, but a true fable, that anecdote of the ancients, since it gives a picture of the contradictory elements in his being. Democritus is supposed to have blinded himself so that the sensuous light of the eye would not darken the sharpness of intellect. This is the same man who, according to Cicero, wandered through half the world. But he did not find what he was looking for. An opposite figure appears to us in Epicurus. Epicurus is satisfied and blissful in philosophy. You must, he says, serve philosophy so that true freedom will he your lot. He who has subordinated and surrendered himself to it does not need to wait, he is emancipated at once. For to serve philosophy is freedom itself. 21. Consequently he teaches, let no one when young delay to study philosophy, nor when he is old grow weary of his study. For no one can come too early or too late to secure the health of his soul. And the man who says that the age for philosophy has either not yet come or has gone by is like the man who salves that the age for happiness is not yet come to him, or has passed away. 22. While Democritus, dissatisfied with philosophy, throws himself into the arms of empirical knowledge, Epicurus has nothing but contempt for the positive sciences, since in his opinion they contribute nothing to true perfection. 23. He is called an enemy of science, a scorner of grammar. 24. He is even accused of ignorance. But, says an Epicurean in Cicero, it was not Epicurus who was without erudition, but those are ignorant who believe that what is shameful for a boy not to know ought still to be recited by the old man. 25. But while Democritus seeks to learn from Egyptian priests, Persian Chaldeans and Indian Gymnosophists, Epicurus prides himself on not having had a teacher, on being self-taught. There are some people, he says according to Seneca, who struggle for truth without any assistance. Among these people he has himself traced out his path, and it is they, the self-taught, whom he praises most. The others, according to him, are second-rate minds. While Democritus is driven into all parts of the world, Epicurus leaves his garden in Athens scarcely 2 or 3 times and travels to Ionia, not to engage in studies but to visit friends. Finally, while Democritus, despairing of acquiring knowledge, blinds himself, Epicurus, feeling the hour of death approaching, takes a warm bath, calls for pure wine, and recommends to his friends that they be faithful to philosophy. 29. C. The differences that we have just set forth should not be attributed to the accidental individuality of the two philosophers. They embody two opposite tendencies. We see as a difference of practical energy that which is expressed in the passages above as a difference of theoretical consciousness. We consider finally the form of reflection which expresses the relation of thought to being, their mutual relationship. In the general relationship which the philosopher sees between the world and thought, he merely makes objective for himself the relation of his own particular consciousness to the real world. Now Democritus uses necessity as a form of reflection of reality. 30. Aristotle says of him that he traces everything back to necessity. 31. Diogenes Laertius reports that the vortex of atoms, the origin of all, is the democritean necessity. 32. More satisfactory explanations are given by the author of De Placitis Philosophorum. Necessity is, according to Democritus, fate and law, providence, and the creator of the world. But the substance of this necessity is the antitype and the movement and impulse of matter. A similar passage is to be found in the Physical Selections of Stobaeus, 34, and in the 6th book of the Praeparatio Evangelica of Eusebius. In the Ethical Selections of Stobaeus, the following aphorism of Democritus is preserved, 36. It is almost exactly repeated in the 14th book of Eusebius, 37. Human beings like to create for themselves the illusion of chance, a manifestation of their own perplexity, since chance is incompatible with sound thinking. Simplicius similarly attributes to Democritus a passage in which Aristotle speaks of the ancient doctrine that does away with chance. Contrast this with Epicurus. Necessity, introduced by some as the absolute ruler, does not exist, but some things are accidental, others depend on our arbitrary will. Necessity cannot be persuaded, but chance is unstable. It would be better to follow the myth about the gods than to be a slave to the hymernean of the physicists. For the former leaves hope for mercy if we do honor to the gods, while the latter is inexorable necessity. But it is chance which must be accepted, not God, as the multitude believe. 39. It is a misfortune to live in necessity, but to live in necessity is not a necessity. On all sides many short and easy paths to freedom are open. Let us therefore thank God that no man can be kept in life. It is permitted to subdue necessity itself. The Epicurean Velleius in Cicero says something similar about Stoic philosophy. What are we to think of a philosophy in which, as to ignorant old women, everything seems to occur through fate? By Epicurus we have been redeemed, set free. 41. Thus Epicurus even denies disjunctive judgment so as not to have to acknowledge any concept of necessity. 42. True, it is claimed that Democritus also used the concept of chance, but of the two passages on this matter which can be found in Simplicius, 43, the one renders the other suspect, because it shows clearly that it was not Democritus who used the category of chance, but Simplicius who ascribed it to him as a consequence. For he says, Democritus assigns, generally speaking, no cause for the creation of the world, he seems therefore to make chance the cause. Here, however, we are concerned not with the determination of the content, but with the form used consciously by Democritus. The situation is similar in regard to the report by Eusebius that Democritus made chance the ruler of the universal and divine, and claimed that here it is through chance that everything happens, whereas he excluded chance from human life and empirical nature, and called its supporters foolish. In part, we see in these statements only a desire of the Christian bishop Dionysius for conclusion forcing. In part, where the universal and divine begin, the democritean concept of necessity ceases to differ from chance. Hence, this much is historically certain. Democritus makes use of necessity, Epicurus of chance. and each of them rejects the opposite view with polemical irritation. The principal consequence of this difference appears in the way individual physical phenomena are explained. Necessity appears in finite nature as relative necessity as determinism. Relative necessity can only be deduced from real possibility, i.e., it is a network of conditions, reasons, causes, etc., by means of which this necessity reveals itself. Real possibility is LT, GT, the explication of relative necessity, and we find it used by Democritus. We cite some passages from Simplicius. If somebody is thirsty and drinks and feels better, Democritus will not assign chance as the cause but thirst. For even though he seems to use chance in regard to the creation of the world, yet he maintains that chance is not the cause of any particular event, but on the contrary leads back to other causes. Thus, for example, digging is the cause of a treasure being found, or growing the cause of the olive tree. The enthusiasm and the seriousness with which Democritus introduces this manner of explanation into the observation of nature, the importance he attaches to the striving to ascertain causes, are naively expressed in his avowal. I would rather discover a new ideology than acquire the Persian crown. 46. Once again, Epicurus stands directly opposed to Democritus. Chance for him is a reality which has only the value of possibility. Abstract possibility, however, is the direct antipode of real possibility. The latter is restricted within sharp boundaries, as is the intellect. The former is unbounded, as is the imagination. Real possibility seeks to explain the necessity and reality of its object. Abstract possibility is not interested in the object which is explained, but in the subject which does the explaining. The object need only be possible, conceivable. That which is abstractly possible which can be conceived, constitutes no obstacle to the thinking subject, no limit, no stumbling block. Whether this possibility is also real is irrelevant, since here the interest does not extend to the object as object. Epicurus therefore proceeds with a boundless nonchalance in the explanation of separate physical phenomena. More light will be thrown upon this fact by the letter to Pythocles, later to be considered. Suffice it here to draw attention to Epicurus's attitude to the opinions of earlier physicists. Or the author of De Placidis Philosophorum Stobaeus quote the different views of the philosophers concerning the substance of the stars, the size and shape of the sun, and similar matters. It is always said of Epicurus, he rejects none of these opinions, all could be right, he adheres to the possible. Yes, Epicurus polemicizes even against the rationally determining, and for precisely this reason, one-sided method of explanation by real possibility. Thus Seneca says in his Questions Naturalis, Epicurus maintains that all these causes are possible, and then attempts in addition, still other explanations. He blames those who claim that any particular one of them occurs because it is rash to judge epidictically about that which can only be deduced from conjectures. One can see that there is no interest in investigating the real causes of objects. All that matters is the tranquility of the explaining subject, since everything possible is admitted as possible, which corresponds to the character of abstract possibility. The chance of being is clearly transferred only into the chance of thought. The only rule which Epicurus prescribes, namely, that the explanation should not contradict sensation, is self-evident, for to be abstractly possible consists precisely in being free from contradiction, which therefore must be avoided. 49. And Epicurus confesses finally that his method of explaining aims only at the ataraxy of self-consciousness, not at knowledge of nature in and for itself. It requires no further clarification to show how in this matter too, Epicurus differs from Democritus. We thus see that the two men are opposed to each other at every single step. The one is a skeptic, the other a dogmatist. The one considers the sensuous world as subjective semblance, the other as objective appearance. He who considers the sensuous world as subjective semblance applies himself to empirical natural science and to positive knowledge, and represents the unrest of observation, experimenting, learning everywhere, ranging over the wide, wide world. The other, who considers the phenomenal world to be real, scorns empiricism. Embodied in him are the serenity of thought satisfied in itself, the self-sufficiency that draws its knowledge ex principio interno. But the contradiction goes still farther. The skeptic and empiricist, who holds sensuous nature to be subjective semblance, considers it from the point of view of necessity and endeavors to explain and to understand the real existence of things. The philosopher and dogmatist, on the other hand, who considers appearance to be real, sees everywhere only chance, and his method of explanation tends rather to negate all objective reality of nature. There seems to be a certain absurdity in these contradictions. It hardly seems still possible to presume that these men who contradict each other on all points will adhere to one and the same doctrine. And yet they seem to be chained to each other. The task of the next section is to comprehend their relationship in general. Footnotes. 1. Aristotle, On the Soul, 1 p8, published by Trendelenburg, suppose knowledge to be sensation, and this to be a physical alteration. That they say that what appears to our senses must be true, for it is for these reasons that both Empedocles and Democritus, and one may almost say, all the others have fallen victims to opinions of this sort. For Empedocles says that when men change their condition, they change their knowledge. Part 2. On the difference between democritean and epicurean physics, in detail. Chapter 1. The declination of the atom from the straight line. Epicurus assumes a threefold motion of the atoms in the void. One motion is the fall in a straight line. The second originates in the deviation of the atom from the straight line, and the third is established through the repulsion of the many atoms. Both Democritus and Epicurus accept the first and the third motion. The declination of the atom from the straight line differentiates the one from the other. 2. This motion of declination has often been made the subject of a joke. Cicero, more than any other, is inexhaustible when he touches on this theme. Thus, we read, in him, among other things, Epicurus maintains that the atoms are thrust downwards in a straight line by their weight. This motion is said to be the natural motion of bodies. But then it occurred to him that if all atoms were thrust downwards, no atom could ever meet another one. Epicurus therefore resorted to a lie. He said that the atom makes a very tiny swerve, which is of course entirely impossible. From this arose complexities, combinations, and adhesions of the atoms with one another, and out of this came the world, all parts of it and its contents. Besides all this being a puerile invention, he does not even achieve what he desires. 3. We find another version in the first book of Cicero's treatise on the nature of the gods. Since Epicurus saw that, if the atoms traveled downwards by their own weight, nothing would be within our control, for their motion would be determined and necessary, he invented a means for escaping this necessity, a means which had escaped the notice of Democritus. He says that the atom, although thrust downwards by its weight and gravity, makes a very slight swerve. To assert this is more disgraceful than to he incapable of defending what he wants. 4. Pierre Bayle expresses a similar opinion, before him, i.e., Epicurus. Only the motion of weight and that of reflection were conceded to the atom. Epicurus. Suppose that even in the midst of the void the atoms declined slightly from the straight line, and from this, he said, arose freedom. It must be noted, in passing, that this was not the only motive that led him to invent this motion of declination. He also used it to explain the meeting of atoms, for he saw clearly that supposing they move with equal speed downwards along straight lines, he would never be able to explain that they could meet. And that, thus, the creation of the world would have been impossible. It was necessary then that they should deviate from the straight line. 5. For the present I leave the validity of these reflections an open question. This much everyone will notice in passing, that the most recent critic of Epicurus, Schaubach, has misunderstood Cicero when he says, the atoms are all thrust downwards by gravity, hence parallel, owing to physical causes, but through mutual repulsion they acquire another motion, according to Cicero, de nature deorum, I, XXV, an oblique motion due to accidental causes, and indeed from all eternity. 6. In the first place, Cicero in the quoted passage does not make the repulsion the reason for the oblique direction, but rather the oblique direction the reason for the repulsion. In the second place, he does not speak of accidental causes, but rather criticizes the fact that no causes at all are mentioned, as it would be in and for itself contradictory to assume repulsion, and at the same time accidental causes as the reason for the oblique direction. At best, one could then still speak of accidental causes of the repulsion, but not of accidental causes of the oblique direction. For the rest, one peculiarity in Cicero's and Bayle's reflections is too obvious not to be stressed immediately. They foist upon Epicurus motives of which the one nullifies the other. Epicurus is supposed to have assumed a declination of the atoms in order to explain the repulsion on one occasion and on another freedom. But if the atoms do not meet without declination, then declination as an explanation of freedom is superfluous, for the opposite of freedom begins, as we see in Lucretius, only with the deterministic and forced meeting of atoms. But if the atoms meet without declination, then this is superfluous for explaining repulsion. Maintain that this contradiction arises when the causes for the declination of the atom from the straight line are understood so superficially and disconnectedly as they are by Cicero and Bayle. We shall find in Lucretius, the only one in general of all the ancients who has understood Epicurean physics, a more profound exposition. We now shall consider the declination itself. Just as the point is negated in the line, so is every failing body negated in the straight line it describes. Its specific quality does not matter here at all. A falling apple describes a perpendicular line just as a piece of iron does. Every body, insofar as we are concerned with the motion of falling, is therefore nothing but a moving point, and indeed a point without independence, which in a certain mode of being, the straight line which it describes surrenders its individuality. Aristotle therefore is correct when he objects against the Pythagoreans. You say that the motion of the line is the surface, that of the point the line, then the motions of the monads will also be lines. 8. The consequence of this for the monads as well as for the atoms would therefore be, since they are in constant motion. 9. That neither monads nor atoms exist, but rather disappear in the straight line, for the solidity of the atom does not even enter into the picture, insofar as it is only considered as something falling in a straight line. To begin with, if the void is imagined as spatial void, then the atom is the immediate negation of abstract space, hence a spatial point. The solidity, the intensity which maintains itself in itself against the incohesion of space, can only be added by virtue of a principle which negates space in its entire domain. A principle such as time is in real nature. Moreover, if this itself is not admitted, the atom, insofar as its motion is a straight line, is determined only by space, and is prescribed a relative being and a purely material existence. But we have seen that one moment in the concept of the atom is that of being pure form, negation of all relativity, of all relation to another mode of being. We have noted at the same time that Epicurus objectifies for himself both moments, which, although they contradict one another, are nevertheless inherent in the concept of the atom. How then can Epicurus give reality to the pure form determination of the atom, the concept of pure individuality, negating any mode of being determined by another being? Since he is moving in the domain of immediate being, all determinations are immediate. Opposite determinations are therefore opposed to one another as immediate realities. But the relative existence which confronts the atom, the mode of being which it has to negate, is the straight line. The immediate negation of this motion is another motion which therefore spatially conceived is the declination from the straight line. The atoms are purely self-sufficient bodies, or rather bodies conceived in absolute self-sufficiency, like the heavenly bodies. Hence again, like the heavenly bodies, they move not in straight but in oblique lines. The motion of failing is the motion of non-self-sufficiency. If Epicurus therefore represents the materiality of the atom in terms of its motion along a straight line, he has given reality to its form determination in the declination from the straight line, and these opposed determinations are represented as directly opposed motions. Lucretius therefore is correct when he maintains that the declination breaks the fati foedera, 10, and, since he applies this immediately to consciousness, it can be said of the atom that the declination is that something in its breast that can fight back and resist. But when Cicero reproaches Epicurus that he does not even attain the goal for which he made all this up, for if all atoms declined, none of them would ever combine, or some would deviate, others would be driven straight ahead by their motion. So it would be necessary, as it were, to give the atoms definite assignments beforehand, which had to move straight ahead and which obliquely. This objection has the justification that the two moments inherent in the concept of the atom are represented as directly different motions, and therefore must be allotted to different individuals, an inconsistency but a consistent one since the domain of the atom is immediacy. Epicurus feels this inherent contradiction quite well. He therefore endeavors to represent the declination as being as imperceptible as possible to the senses. It takes place in time, in place unfixed. Lucretius, De Rerum Nature, 2, 294. It occurs in the smallest possible space. Moreover, Cicero, and according to Plutarch, several ancient authors, reproach Epicurus for saying that the declination of the atom occurs without cause. Nothing more disgraceful, says Cicero, can happen to a physicist. But, in the first place, a physical cause such as Cicero wants would throw the declination of the atom back into the domain of determinism, out of which it was precisely to be lifted. And then, the atom is by no means complete before it has been submitted to the determination of declination. To inquire after the cause of this determination means, therefore, to inquire after the cause that makes the atom a principle, a clearly meaningless inquiry to anyone for whom the atom is the cause of everything, hence without cause itself. Finally, Bayle is supported by the authority of Augustine, who states that Democritus ascribed to the atom a spiritual principle. An authority, by the way, who, in contrast to Aristotle and the other ancients, is without any importance reproaches Epicurus for having thought out the concept of declination instead of this spiritual principle. But, on the contrary, merely a word would have been gained with this soul of the atom, whereas the declination represents the real soul of the atom, the concept of abstract individuality. Before we consider the consequence of the declination of the atom from the straight line, we must draw attention to another most important element, which up to now has been entirely overlooked. The declination of the atom from the straight line is, namely, not a particular determination which appears accidentally in Epicurean physics. On the contrary, the law which it expresses goes through the whole Epicurean philosophy, in such a way, however, that, as goes without saying, the determination of its appearance depends on the domain in which it is applied. As a matter of fact, abstract individuality can make its concept, its form determination, the pure being for itself, the independence from immediate being, the negation of all relativity, effective only by abstracting from the being that confronts it, for in order truly to overcome it, abstract individuality had to idealize it, a thing only generality can accomplish. Thus, while the atom frees itself from its relative existence, the straight line, by abstracting from it, by swerving away from it, so the entire Epicurean philosophy swerves away from the restrictive mode of being wherever the concept of abstract individuality, self-sufficiency and negation of all relation to other things must be represented in its existence. The purpose of action is to be found therefore in abstracting, swerving away from pain and confusion, in ataraxy. Hence the good is the flight from evil, pleasure the swerving away from suffering. 22. Finally, where abstract individuality appears in its highest freedom and independence, in its totality, there it follows that the being which is swerved away from is all being. For this reason the gods swerve away from the world, do not bother with it and live outside it. These gods of Epicurus have often been ridiculed. These gods who, like human beings, dwell in the inner mundia of the real world, have no body but a quasi-body, no blood but quasi-blood. 24, and, content to abide in blissful peace, lend no card to any supplication, are unconcerned with us and the world, are honored because of their beauty, their majesty, and their superior nature. And not for any gain. And yet, these gods are no fiction of Epicurus. They did exist. They are the elastic gods of Greek art. Cicero, the Roman, rightly scoffs at them. But Plutarch, the Greek, has forgotten the whole Greek outlook when he claims that although this doctrine of the gods does away with fear and superstition, it produces no joy or favor in the gods, but instead bestows on us that relation to them that we have to the Hyrcanian fish, from which we expect neither harm nor advantage. Theoretical calm is one of the chief characteristics of the Greek gods. As Aristotle says, what is best has no need of action, for it is its own end. 2007. We now consider the consequence that follows directly from the declination of the atom. In it is expressed the atom's negation of all motion and relation by which it is determined as a particular mode of being by another being. This is represented in such a way that the atom abstracts from the opposing being and withdraws itself from it. But what is contained herein, namely its negation of all relation to something else, must be realized, positively established. This can only be done if the being to which it relates itself is none other than itself, hence equally an atom, and since it itself is directly determined, many atoms. The repulsion of the many atoms is therefore the necessary realization of the lexitomy, as Lucretius calls the declination. But since here every determination is established as a particular being, repulsion is added as a third motion to the former ones. Lucretius is therefore correct when he says that, if the atoms were not to decline, neither their repulsion nor their meeting would have taken place, and the world would never have been created. 28. For atoms are their own sole object and can only be related to themselves, hence speaking in spatial terms they can only meet. Because every relative existence of these atoms by which they would be related to other beings is negated. And this relative existence is, as we have seen, their original motion, that of falling in a straight line. Hence they meet only by virtue of their declination from the straight line. It has nothing to do with merely material fragmentation. 29. And in truth, the immediately existing individuality is only realized conceptually, inasmuch as it relates to something else which actually is itself, even when the other thing confronts it in the form of immediate existence. Thus man ceases to be a product of nature only when the other being to which he relates himself is not a different existence but is itself an individual human being, even if it is not yet the mind. But for man as man to become his own real object, he must have crushed within himself his relative being, the power of desire, and of mere nature. Repulsion is the first form of self-consciousness. It corresponds therefore to that self-consciousness which conceives itself as immediate being, as abstractly individual. The concept of the atom is therefore realized in repulsion, inasmuch as it is abstract form, but no less also the opposite. Inasmuch as it is abstract matter, for that to which it relates itself consists, to be true, of atoms, but other atoms. But when I relate myself to myself as to something which is directly another, then my relationship is a material one. This is the most extreme degree of externality that can be conceived. In the repulsion of the atoms, therefore, their materiality which was posited in the fall in a straight line, and the form determination which was established in the declination are united synthetically. Democritus, in contrast to Epicurus, transforms into an enforced motion, into an act of blind necessity, that which to Epicurus is the realization of the concept of the atom. We have already seen above that he considers the vortex, dini, resulting from the repulsion and collision of the atoms to be the substance of necessity. He therefore sees in the repulsion only the material side, the fragmentation, the change, and not the ideal side, according to which all relation to something else is negated and motion is established as self-determination. This can be clearly seen from the fact that he conceives one and the same body divided through empty space into many parts quite sensuously, like gold broken up into pieces. Thus he scarcely conceived of the one as the concept of the atom. Aristotle correctly argues against him. Hence, Leucippus and Democritus, who assert that the primary bodies always moved in the void and in the infinite, should say what kind of motion this is and what is the motion natural to them. For if each of the elements is forcibly moved by the other, then it is still necessary that each should have also a natural motion, outside which is the enforced one. And this first motion must not be enforced but natural, otherwise the procedure goes on to infinity. 31. The Epicurean declination of the atom thus changed the whole inner structure of the domain of the atoms, since through it the form determination is validated and the contradiction inherent in the concept of the atom is realized. Epicurus was therefore the first to grasp the essence of the repulsion, even if only in sensuous form, whereas Democritus only knew of its material existence. Hence we find also more concrete forms of the repulsion applied by Epicurus. In the political domain there is the covenant, in the social domain friendship, which is praised as the highest good. Footnotes. 1. Stobaeus, Physical Selections, 1st p. 33. Epicurus says that the atoms move sometimes vertically downwards, at other times by deviating from a straight line, but the motion upward is due to collision and recoil. Comp. Cicero, on the highest goods and evils IV. Plutarch, on the sentiments of the philosophers p. 249. Stobaeus, 1c. p. 40. 2. Cicero, on the nature of the gods, 1xxi. What is there in Epicurus's natural philosophy that does not come from Democritus? Since even if he introduced some alterations, for instance, the swerve of the atoms of which I spoke just now. 3. Cicero, on the highest goods and evils, IV. He, Epicurus, believes that these same indivisible solid bodies are borne by their own weight perpendicularly downward, which he holds is the natural motion of all bodies. But thereupon this clever fellow, encountering the difficulty that if they all traveled downwards in a straight line, and, as I said, perpendicularly, no one atom would ever be able to overtake any other atom, accordingly introduced an idea of his own invention. He said that the atom makes a very tiny swerve, the smallest divergence possible, and so are produced entanglements. Chapter 2. The qualities of the atom. It contradicts the concept of the atom that the atom should have properties because, as Epicurus says, every property is variable, but the atoms do not change. Nevertheless, it is a necessary consequence to attribute properties to atoms. Indeed, the many atoms of repulsion separated by sensuous space must necessarily be immediately different from one another and from their pure essence, i.e., they must possess qualities. In the following analysis, I therefore take no account of the assertion made by Schneider and Ehrenberger that Epicurus attributed no qualities to the atoms. Paragraphs 44 and 54 of the letter to Herodotus in Diogenes Laertius have been interpolated. If this were truly so, how is one to invalidate the evidence of Lucretius, Plutarch, and indeed of all other authors who speak of Epicurus? Moreover, Diogenes Laertius mentions the qualities of the atom not in 2, but in 10 paragraphs. Nos. 42, 43, 44, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, and 61. The grounds these critics give for their contention, that they did not know how to reconcile the qualities of the atom with its concept, are very shallow. Spinoza says that ignorance is no argument. Spinoza, Ethics, Part I, Prop. 36, Appendix. If one was to delete the passages in the ancients which he does not understand, how quickly would we have a tabula rasa? Through the qualities, the atom acquires an existence which contradicts its concept. It is assumed as an externalized being different from its essence. It is this contradiction which mainly interests Epicurus. Hence, as soon as he posits a property and thus draws the consequence of the material nature of the atom, he counterposits at the same time determinations which again destroy this property in its own sphere and validate instead the concept of the atom. He therefore determines all properties in such a way that they contradict themselves. Democritus, on the other hand, nowhere considers the properties in relation to the atom itself, nor does he objectify the contradiction between concept and existence which is inherent in them. His whole interest lies rather in representing the qualities in relation to concrete nature which is to be formed out of them. To him, they are merely hypotheses to explain the plurality, which makes its appearance. It follows that the concept of the atom has nothing to do with them. In order to prove our assertion, it is first of all necessary to elucidate the sources which here seem to contradict one another. In the treatise De Placitis Philosophorum we read, Epicurus asserts that the atoms have three qualities: size, shape, weight. Democritus only assumed two: size and shape. Epicurus added weight as the third. The same passage is repeated word for word in the Praeparatio Evangelica of Eusebius. It is confirmed by the testimony of Simplicius and Philoponus, according to whom Democritus attributed to the atoms only difference in size and shape. Directly contrary stands Aristotle who, in the book De Generations et Corruptions, attributes to the atoms of Democritus difference in weight. In another passage, in the first book of De Caelo, Aristotle leaves undecided the question of whether or not Democritus ascribed weight to the atoms, for he says, thus none of the bodies will be absolutely light if they all have weight, but if all have lightness, none will be heavy. In his Geschichte der alten Philosophie, Ritter, basing himself on the authority of Aristotle, rejects the assertions of Plutarch, Eusebius, and Stobaeus. He does not consider the testimony of Simplicius and Philoponus. Let us see whether these passages are really so contradictory. In the passage cited, Aristotle does not speak of the qualities of the atom ex professo as someone who knows their profession. On the other hand, we read in the 8th book of the Metaphysics, Democritus assumes three differences between atoms, for the underlying body is one and the same, with respect to matter, but it differs in rhysmos, meaning shape, in trope, meaning position, or in diathege, meaning arrangement. This much can be immediately concluded from this passage LTGT. Weight is not mentioned as a property of the democritean atoms. The fragmented pieces of matter, kept apart by the void, must have special forms, and these are quite externally perceived from the observation of space. This emerges even more clearly from the following passage of Aristotle. Leucippus and his companion Democritus hold that the elements are the full and the void. These are the basis of being as matter, just as those who assume only one fundamental substance generate all other things by its affections, assuming rarity and density as the principles of qualities. In the same way, Leucippus and Democritus also teach that the differences between the atoms are the causes of the other things, for the underlying being differs only by rhysmos, diathege, and trope. That is, it differs from n in shape, and from na in arrangement, z from n in position. 1. It is evident from this quotation that Democritus considers the properties of the atom only in relation to the formation of the differences in the world of appearances, and not in relation to the atom itself. It follows further that Democritus does not single out weight as an essential property of the atoms. For him, weight is taken for granted since everything corporeal has weight. In the same way, according to him, even size is not a basic quality. It is an accidental determination which is already given to the atoms together with figure. Only the diversity of the figures is of interest to Democritus, since nothing more is contained in shape, position, and arrangement. Size, shape, and weight, by being combined as they are by Epicurus, are differences which the atom in itself possesses. Shape, position, and arrangement are differences which the atom possesses in relation to something else. Whereas we find in Democritus mere hypothetical determinations to explain the world of appearances, in Epicurus the consequence of the principle itself will be presented to us. We shall therefore discuss in detail his determinations of the properties of the atom. First of all, the atoms have size, and then again, size is also negated. That is to say, they do not have every size, 2, but only some differences in size among them must be admitted. 13. Indeed, only the negation of the large can be ascribed to them, the small, also not the minimum, for this would be merely a spatial determination, but the infinitely small, which expresses the contradiction. Rosinius, in his notes on the fragments of Epicurus, therefore translates one passage incorrectly and completely ignores the other, when he says, in this way Epicurus tried to make plausible the tenuity of the atoms of incredible smallness by saying, according to Laertius X44, that they have no size. Now I shall not concern myself with the fact that, according to Eusebius, Epicurus was the first to ascribe infinite smallness to the atoms, whereas Democritus also assumed atoms of the largest size. Stobaeus says even as large as the world. This, on the one hand, contradicts the testimony of Aristotle. On the other hand, Eusebius, or rather the Alexandrian bishop, Dionysius, from whom he takes excerpts, contradicts himself, for in the same book we read that Democritus assumed as the principles of nature indivisible bodies perceptible through reason. This much at least is clear. Democritus was not aware of the contradiction, he did not pay attention to it, whereas it was the chief interest of Epicurus. The second property of the Epicurean atoms is shape, but this determination also contradicts the concept of the atom, and its opposite must be assumed. Abstract individuality is abstract identity to itself and therefore without shape. The differences in the shape of the atoms cannot therefore be determined although they are not absolutely infinite. It is rather by a definite and finite number of shapes that the atoms are differentiated from one another. From this, it is obvious that there are not as many different figures as there are atoms, while Democritus assumes an infinite number of figures. If every atom had a particular shape, then there would have to be atoms of infinite size, for they would have an infinite difference, the difference from all the others, in themselves, like the monads of Leibniz. This leads to the inversion of Leibniz's assertion that no two things are identical, and there are infinitely many atoms of the same shape. This obviously negates again the determination of the shape, because a shape which no longer differs from another is not shape. Finally, it is highly important that Epicurus makes weight the third quality, for in the center of gravity matter possesses the ideal individuality which forms a principal determination of the atom. Hence, once the atoms are brought into the realm of presentation, they must also have weight. But weight also directly contradicts the concept of the atom, because it is the individuality of matter as an ideal point which lies outside matter. But the atom is itself this individuality, as it were the center of gravity presented as an individual existence. Weight therefore exists for Epicurus only as different weight, and the atoms are themselves substantial centers of gravity like the heavenly bodies. If this is applied to the concrete, then the obvious result is the fact which old Brucker finds so amazing, and of which Lucretius assures us, namely that the earth has no center towards which everything strives, and that there are no antipodes. Furthermore, since weight belongs only to that atom which is different from the other, hence externalized and endowed with properties, then it is clear that where the atoms are not thought of as many in their differentiation from one elements except so far as to allot the sphere to fire, air, water, and the rest. Philoponus, 1c, they have not only entirely different shapes. First Lucretius, on the nature of things, 2. The, another, but only in relation to the void, the determination of weight ceases to exist. The atoms, as different as they may be in mass and shape, move therefore with equal speed in empty space. Epicurus thus applies weight only in regard to repulsion and the resulting compositions. This has led to the assertions that only the conglomerations of the atoms are endowed with weight, but not the atoms themselves. Gassendi already praises Epicurus because, led purely by reason, he anticipated the experimentally demonstrated fact that all bodies, although very different in weight and mass, have the same velocity when they fall from above to below. The consideration of the properties of the atoms leads us therefore to the same result as the consideration of the declination, namely, that Epicurus objectifies the contradiction in the concept of the atom between essence and existence. He thus gave us the science of atomistics. In Democritus, on the other hand, there is no realization of the principle itself. He only maintains the material side and offers hypotheses for the benefit of empirical observation. 1 Diogenes Laertius, X 43. The atoms move with equal speed, since the void makes way for the lightest and heaviest alike through all eternity. 61. When they are traveling through the void and meet with no resistance, the atoms must move with equal speed. Neither will heavy atoms travel more quickly than small and light ones so long as nothing meets them, nor will small atoms travel more quickly than large ones, provided they always find a passage suitable to their size, and provided that they meet with no obstruction. Lucretius, On the Nature of Things, 2. But empty space can offer no resistance to any object in any quarter at any time, so as not to yield free passage as its own nature demands. Therefore, through undisturbed vacuum, all bodies must travel at equal speed though impelled by unequal weights. 2 Comp. Ch. 3. 3 Feuerbach, History of the Newer Philosophy. Gassendi. C. X.S. No. Although Epicurus had perhaps never thought about this experiment, he reached, led by reason, the same opinion about atoms that experiment has recently taught us. This opinion is that all bodies, although very different in weight and bulk, have the same velocity when they fall from above to below. Thus he was of opinion that all atoms, however much they may differ in size and weight, move with an equal velocity. Chapter 3. Atomoiarchae and Atoma, Stoicheia. Schaubach, in his treatise on the astronomical concepts of Epicurus, to which we have already referred, makes the following assertion. Epicurus, as well as Aristotle, has made a distinction between principles, atomoiarchae, Diogenes Laertius, X 41, and elements, Atoma Stoicheia, Diogenes Laertius, X 86. The former are the atoms recognizable only through reason and do not occupy space. These are called atoms not because they are the smallest bodies, but because they are indivisible in space. According to these conceptions, one might think that Epicurus did not attribute any spatial properties to the atom. But in the letter to Herodotus, Diogenes Laertius, X 44-54, he gives the atoms not only weight but also size and shape. I therefore consider these atoms as belonging to the second species, S, those that have developed out of the former, but can still be regarded again as elementary particles of the bodies. Let us look more closely at the passage which Schaubach cites from Diogenes Laertius. It reads, for instance, such propositions that the all consists of bodies and non-corporeal nature, or that there are indivisible elements and other such statements. Epicurus here teaches Pythicles, to whom he is writing, that the teaching about meteors differs from all other doctrines in physics, for example, that everything is either body or void, that there are indivisible basic elements. It is obvious that there is here no reason to assume that it is a question of a second species of atoms. It may perhaps seem that the disjunction between the all consisting of bodies and non-corporeal bodies, and that there are indivisible elements establishes a difference between soma and aroma, Stoicheia, so that we might say that soma stands for atoms of the first kind in contrast to the atoma Stoicheia. But this is quite out of the question. Soma means the corporeal, in contrast to the void, which for this reason is called asomaton. The term soma therefore includes the atoms as well as compound bodies. For example, in the letter to Herodotus we read, the all is body, if there were not that which we call void space and non-corporeal nature. Among bodies some are compound, others the things out of which the compounds are made, and these latter are indivisible and unchangeable. Consequently, these first principles are necessarily of indivisible corporeal nature 3. Epicurus is thus speaking in the passage cited first of the corporeal in general, in contrast to the void, and then of the corporeal in particular, the atoms. Schaubach's reference to Aristotle proves just as little. True, the difference between arche and stoicheion, which the Stoics particularly insist upon, can indeed also be found in Aristotle, but he nonetheless assumes the identity of the two expressions. He even teaches explicitly that stoicheion denotes primarily the atom. Leucippus and Democritus likewise call the fullness and void. In Lucretius, in Epicurus's letters as quoted by Diogenes Laertius, in the Colloides of Plutarch, in Sextus Empiricus, the properties are ascribed to the atoms themselves, and for this reason they were determined as transcending themselves. However, if it is thought an antinomy that bodies perceptible only to reason should be endowed with spatial qualities, then it is an even greater antinomy that the spatial qualities themselves can be perceived only through the intellect. Finally, Schaubach, in further support of his view, cites the following passage from Stobaeus, Epicurus, that the primary bodies should be simple, those bodies compounded from them however should have weight. To this passage from Stobaeus could be added the following, in which atoma stoicheia are mentioned as a particular kind of atom, Plutarch, De Placet. Philosoph. I 246 and 249 in SS Taub. Physical selections, I p 5.6 for the rest it is by no means. Epicurus asserts that there are 4 other natural beings which are immortal of this sort are atoms, the vacuum, the infinite, and the similar parts, and these last are homoomerias and likewise elements. 12. Epicurus bodies are not to be limited, but the first bodies are simple bodies, and all those composed of them possess weight. Stobicus Physical Selections 1 p. 52. Metrodorus, the teacher of Epicurus, that the causes, however, are the atoms and elements. p5. Epicurus claimed in these passages that the original atoms are without size, shape, and weight. On the contrary, weight alone is mentioned as a distinctive characteristic of the atomoiarchae and aroma stoicheia. But we observed already in the preceding chapter that weight is applied only in regard to repulsion and the conglomerations arising therefrom. With the invention of the atoma stoicheia, we also gain nothing. It is just as difficult to pass from the atomoiarchae to the aroma stoicheia as it is to ascribe properties directly to them. Nevertheless, I do not deny such a differentiation entirely. I only deny that there are 2 different and fixed kinds of atoms. They are rather different determinations of one and the same kind. Before discussing this difference, I would like to call attention to a procedure typical of Epicurus. He likes to assume the different determinations of a concept as different independent existences. Just as his principle is the atom, so is the manner of his cognition itself atomistic. Every moment of the development is at once transformed in his hands into a fixed reality which, so to say, is separated from its relations to other things by empty space. Every determination assumes the form of isolated individuality. This procedure may be made clear by the following example. The infinite to epicurean, or the infinitio, as Cicero translates it, is occasionally used by Epicurus as a particular nature, and precisely in the same passages in which we find the stoicheia described as a fixed fundamental substance. We also find the apeiron turned into something independent. However, according to Epicurus' own definitions, the infinite is neither a particular substance nor something outside of the atoms in the void, but rather an accidental determination of the void. We find in fact 3 meanings of apeiron. First, apeiron expresses for Epicurus a quality common to the atoms and the void. It means in this sense the infinitude of the 4 substances essentially indestructible, the atoms, the void, the infinite, and the similar parts, and these are called homoomerias and elements. 1 comp. See all, which is infinite by virtue of the infinite multiplicity of the atoms by virtue of the infinite size of the void. Secondly, aperia is the multiplicity of the atoms, so that not the atom but the infinitely many atoms are placed in opposition to the void. Finally, if we may draw from Democritus a conclusion about Epicurus, apeiron also means exactly the opposite, the unlimited void, which is placed in opposition to the atom determined in itself and limited by itself. In all these meanings, and they are the only ones, even the only possible ones for atomistics, the infinite is a mere determination of the atoms and of the void. Nevertheless, it is singled out as a particular existence, even set up as a specific nature alongside the principles whose determination it expresses. Therefore, even if Epicurus himself thus fixed the determination by which the atom becomes stoicheia as an independent original kind of atom, which, by the way, is not the case judging by the historical superiority of one source over the other, even if Metrodorus, the disciple of Epicurus, as it seems more probable to us, was the first to change the differentiated determination into a differentiated existence, we must ascribe to the subjective mode of atomistic consciousness the changing of separate moments into something independently existing. The 1 Cicero on the highest goods and evils, I vi, that which he follows the atoms, the void. Infinity itself that they call aperia Diogenes Laertius, X 41. Again, the sum of things is infinite. Moreover, the sum of things is unlimited both by reason of the multitude of the atoms and the tent of the void. 2 Plutarch, reply to Colotes 1:114. Now look at the sort of first principles. To account for generation, infinity and the void incapable of action, incapable of being acted upon, bodiless, the infinite disordered, irrational, incapable of formulation, disrupting and confounding itself because of a multiplicity that defies control or limitation. 3 Simplicius, 1c. p. 488. 4 Plutarch, on the sentiments of the philosophers, p. 239. But Metrodorus says that the number of worlds is infinite, and this can be seen from the fact that the number of causes is infinite. But the causes are the atoms or the elements. Stobicus, Physical Selections, IP 52. Metrodorus, the teacher of Epicurus, that the causes, however, are the atoms and elements. Granting of the form of existence to different determinations has not resulted in understanding of their difference. For Democritus, the atom means only stoicheia, a material substrate. The distinction between the atom as arche and stoicheia as principle and foundation belongs to Epicurus. Its importance will be clear from what follows. The contradiction between existence and essence, between matter and form, which is inherent in the concept of the atom, emerges in the individual atom itself once it is endowed with qualities. Through the quality, the atom is alienated from its concept, but at the same time is perfected in its construction. It is from repulsion and the ensuing conglomerations of the qualified atoms that the world of appearance now emerges. In this transition from the world of essence to the world of appearance, the contradiction in the concept of the atom clearly reaches its harshest realization. For the atom is conceptually the absolute, essential form of nature. This absolute form has now been degraded to absolute matter, to the formless substrate of the world of appearance. The atoms are, it is true, the substance of nature out of which everything emerges, into which everything dissolves, but the 1 Lucretius, on the nature of things, 1, 820-821. For the same elements compose sky, sea and lands, rivers and sun, crops, trees and animals. Diogenes Laertius, X 39. Moreover, the sum total of things was always such as it is now, and such it will ever remain. For there is nothing into which it can change. For outside the sum of things there is nothing which could enter into it and bring about the change. The whole of being consists of bodies. 41. These elements are indivisible and unchangeable, and necessarily so, if things are not all to be destroyed and pass into non-existence, but are to be strong enough to endure when the composite bodies are broken up, because they possess a solid nature and are incapable of being anywhere or anyhow dissolved. 2 Diogenes Laertius X. And all things are again dissolved, some faster, some slower, some through the action of one set of causes, others through the action of others. 74. It is clear then that he also makes the worlds perishable, as their parts are subject to change. Lucretius v. 109-110. May reason rather than the event itself convince you that the whole world can collapse with one ear-splitting crack. Abid v. 370-3375. It follows then that the doorway of death is not barred to sky and sun. Continuous annihilation of the world of appearance comes to no result. New appearances are formed, but the atom itself always remains at the bottom as the foundations, thus insofar as the atom is considered as pure concept, its existence is empty space, annihilated nature. Insofar as it proceeds to reality, it sinks down to the material basis which, as the bearer of a world of manifold relations, never exists but in forms which are indifferent and external to it. This is a necessary consequence, since the atom, presupposed as abstractly individual and complete, cannot actualize itself as the idealizing and pervading power of this manifold. Abstract individuality is freedom from being, not freedom in being. It cannot shine in the light of being. This is an element in which this individuality loses its character and becomes material. For this reason, the atom does not enter into the daylight of appearances, or it sinks down to the material basis when it does enter it. The atom as such only exists in the void. The death of nature has thus become its immortal substance, and Lucretius correctly exclaims, when death immortal claims his mortal life, De Ver Nature Theory, 8 and 69. But the fact that Epicurus grasps the contradiction at this its highest peak and objectives it, and therefore distinguishes the atom where it becomes the basis of appearance as stoicheia from the atom as it exists in the void as arche. This constitutes his philosophical difference from Democritus, who only objectives the one moment. This is the same distinction which in the world of essence, in the realm of the atoms and of the void, separates Epicurus from Democritus. However, since only the atom with qualities is the complete one, since the world of appearance can only emerge from the atom which is complete and alienated from its concept, Epicurus expresses this by stating that only the qualified atom becomes stoicheion, or only the atomon stoicheion is endowed with qualities. And earth and the sea's unfathomed floods, it lies tremendously open and confronts them with a chapter 4, time. Since in the atom matter, as pure relationship to itself, is exempted from all relativity and changeability, it follows immediately that time has to be excluded from the concept of the atom. The world of essence. For matter is eternal and independent only insofar as in it abstraction is made of the time moment. On this Democritus and Epicurus agree, but they differ in regard to the manner in which time removed from the world of atoms is now determined, whither it is transferred. For Democritus, time has neither significance nor necessity for the system. He explains time in order to negate it. It is determined as eternal, in order that, as Aristotle and Simplicius state, the emergence and passing away, hence the temporal, is removed from the atoms. Time itself offers proof that not everything need have an origin, a moment of beginning. There is something more profound to be recognized in this notion. The imagining intellect that does not grasp the independence of substance inquires into its becoming in time. It fails to grasp that by making substance temporal, it also makes time substantial, and thus negates its concept, because time made absolute is no longer temporal. But this solution is unsatisfactory from another point of view. Time excluded from the world of essence is transferred into the self-consciousness of the philosophizing subject, but does not make any contact with the world itself. Quite otherwise with Epicurus. Time excluded from the world of essence becomes for him the absolute form of appearance. That is to say, time is determined as accidents of the accidents. The accidents is the change of substance in general. The accidents of the accidents is the change as reflecting in itself. The change is change. This pure form of the world of appearance is time. Composition is the merely passive form of concrete nature, time its active form. If I consider composition in terms of its being, then the atom exists beyond it, in the void, in the imagination. If I consider the atom in terms of its concept, then composition either does not exist at all, or exists only in the subjective imagination. For composition is a relationship in which the atoms, independent, self-enclosed, as it were uninterested in one another, have likewise no relationship to one another. Time, in contrast, the change of the finite to the extent that change is posited as change, is just as much the real form which separates appearance from essence, and posits it as appearance, while leading it back into essence. Composition expresses merely the materiality of the atoms as well as of nature emerging from them. Time, in contrast, is in the world of appearance what the concept of the atom is in the world of essence, namely, the abstraction, destruction, and reduction of all determined being into being for itself. The following consequences can be drawn from these observations. First, Epicurus makes the contradiction between matter and form the characteristic of the nature of appearance, which thus becomes the counter-image of the nature of essence, the atom. This is done by time being opposed to space, the active form of appearance to the passive form. Second, Epicurus was the first to grasp appearance, that is, as alienation of the essence, activating itself in its reality as such an alienation. On the other hand, for Democritus, who considers composition as the only form of the nature of appearance, appearance does not by itself show that it is appearance, something different from essence. Thus, when appearance is considered in terms of its existence, essence becomes totally blended with it. When considered in terms of its concept, essence is totally separated from existence, so that it descends to the level of subjective semblance. The composition behaves indifferently and materially towards its essential foundations. Time, on the other hand, is the fire of essence, eternally consuming appearance and stamping it with dependence and non-essence. Finally, since according to Epicurus time is change, the reflection of appearance in itself, the nature of appearance is justly posited as objective. Sensation is justly made the real criterion of concrete nature, although the atom, its foundation, is only perceived through reason. Indeed, time being the abstract form of sensation, according to the atomism of Epicurean consciousness, the necessity arises for it to be fixed as a nature having a separate existence within nature. The changeability of the sensuous world, its change as change, this reflection of appearance in itself which constitutes the concept of time, has its separate existence in conscious sensuousness. Human sensuousness is therefore embodied time, the existing reflection of the sensuous world in itself. Just as this follows immediately from the definition of the concept of time in Epicurus, so it can also be quite definitely demonstrated in detail. In the letter from Epicurus to Herodotus, time is so defined that it emerges when the accidentals of bodies perceived by the senses are thought of as accidentals. Sensuous perception reflected in itself is thus here the source of time and time itself. Hence time cannot be defined by analogy, nor can anything else be said about it, but it is. 1 Diogenes Laertius, X 72. There is another thing which we must consider carefully. We must not investigate time as we do the other accidents which we investigate in a subject, namely, by referring them to the preconceptions envisaged in our minds, but we must take into account the plain fact itself, in virtue of which we speak of time as long or short, linking to it in intimate connection this attribute of duration. We need not adopt any fresh terms as preferable, but should necessary to keep firmly to the anarchy itself, for sensuous perception reflected in itself is time itself, and there is no going beyond it. On the other hand, in Lucretius, Sextus Empiricus, and Stobaeus, the accidents of the accidents change reflected in itself is defined as time. The reflection of the accidentals in sensuous perception and their reflection themselves are hence posited as one and the same. Because of this interconnection between time and sensuousness, the idola, equally found in Democritus, also acquire a more consistent status. The idola are the forms of natural bodies which, as surfaces as it were, detach themselves like skins and transfer these bodies into appearance. These forms of the things stream constantly forth from them and penetrate into the senses, and in precisely this way allow the objects to appear. Thus, in hearing nature hears itself, in smelling it smells itself, in seeing it sees itself. Human sensuousness is therefore the medium in which natural, 1 Lucretius, on the nature of things, one's processes are reflected as in a focus and ignited into the light of appearance. In Democritus, this is an inconsistency, since appearance is only subjective. In Epicurus, it is a necessary consequence, since sensuousness is the reflection of the world of appearance in itself, its embodied time. Finally, the interconnection between sensuousness and time is revealed in such a way that the temporal character of things and their appearance to the senses are posited as intrinsically one. For it is precisely because bodies appear to the senses that they pass away. Indeed, the idola, by constantly separating themselves from the bodies and flowing into the senses, by having their sensuous existence outside themselves as another nature, by not returning into themselves, that is, out of the diremption, dissolve and pass away. Therefore, just as the atom is nothing but the natural form of abstract, individual self-consciousness, so sensuous nature is only the objectified, empirical, individual self-consciousness, and this is the sensuous. Hence the senses are the only criteria in concrete nature, just as abstract reason is the only criterion in the world of the atoms. 3 Diogenes Laertius, X 49. Chapter 5, The Meteors. Ingenious as Democritus's astronomical opinions may be for his time, they present no philosophical interest. They neither go beyond the domain of empirical reflection, nor have they any more definite intrinsic connection with the atomic doctrine. By contrast, Epicurus's theory of the celestial bodies and the processes connected with them, or his theory of meteors, in this one term he includes it all, stands in opposition not only to Democritus but to the opinion of Greek philosophy as a whole. Worship of the celestial bodies is a cult practiced by all Greek philosophers. The system of the celestial bodies is the first naive and nature-determined existence of true reason. The same position is taken by Greek self-consciousness in the domain of the mind. It is the solar system of the mind. The Greek philosophers therefore worship their own mind in the celestial bodies. Anaxagoras himself, who first gave a physical explanation of heaven and in this way brought it down to earth in a sense different from that of Socrates, answered, when asked for what purpose he was born, for the observation of the sun, the moon, and the heaven. Xenophanes, however, looked up at heaven and said, the one is God. The religious attitude of the Pythagoreans, Plato, and Aristotle to the heavenly bodies is well known. Indeed, Epicurus opposes the outlook of the whole Greek people. Aristotle says it often seems that the concept provides evidence for the phenomena, and the phenomena for the concept. Thus all men have an idea of the gods and assign the highest region to the divine, barbarians as well as Hellenes, and in general all who believe in the existence of the gods, evidently connecting the immortal with the immortal, for otherwise it is impossible. Thus if the divine exists, as it actually does, then what we say about the substance of the celestial bodies is also correct. But this corresponds also to sensuous perception, insofar as human conviction is concerned. For throughout the time that has passed, according to the memories handed down from people to people, nothing seems to have changed, either in heaven as a whole or in any part of it. Even the name seems to have been handed down from the ancients to the present time, and they assume that which we also say. For not once, not twice, but an infinite number of times have the same views come down to us. For since the primary body is something different, apart from the earth and the fire and the air and the water, they called the highest region ether, from the and AI, giving it the byname, eternal time. But the ancients assigned heaven and the highest region to the gods because it alone is immortal. But the present teaching testifies that it is indestructible, ungenerated, and not subject to any mortal ills. In this way our concepts correspond at the same time to intimations about God. But that there is one heaven is evident. It is a tradition handed down from 1 Aristotle on the heavens, myths of later generations, that the heavenly bodies are gods and that the divine encompasses all nature. The rest was added in mythical form for the belief of the masses as useful for the laws and for life. Thus the myths make the gods resemble man and some of the other living creatures, and invent similar things connected with and related to this. If we discard the additions and hold fast only to the first, namely the belief that the primary substances are gods, then we must consider this as having been divinely revealed. And we must hold that, after all sorts of art and philosophy had, in one way or another, been invented and lost again, these opinions came down to us like relics. Epicurus, on the contrary, says, to all this we must add that the greatest confusion of the human soul arises from the fact that men hold that the heavenly bodies are blessed and indestructible and have conflicting desires and actions, and conceive suspicion according to the myths. 6. As to the meteors, we must believe that motion and position and eclipse and rising and setting and related phenomena do not originate in them owing to one ruling and ordering or having ordered, one who at the same time is supposed to possess all bliss and Aristotle Metaphysics c. Indestructibility, for actions do not accord with bliss, but they occur due to causes most closely related to weakness, fear, and need, nor is it to be supposed that some fire-like bodies endowed with bliss arbitrarily submit to these motions. If one does not agree with this, then this contradiction itself produces the greatest confusion in men's souls. Aristotle reproached the ancients for their belief that heaven required the support of Atlas who, in the places of the west stands, supporting with his shoulders the pillar of heaven and earth, Aeschylus, Prometh, 348 ff. Epicurus, on the other hand, blames those who believe that man needs heaven. He finds the Atlas by whom heaven is supported in human stupidity and superstition. Stupidity and superstition also are titans. The letter of Epicurus to Pythicles deals entirely with the theory of the heavenly bodies, with the exception of the last section, which closes the letter with ethical precepts. And appropriately, ethical precepts are appended to the teaching on the meteors. For Epicurus, this theory is a matter of conscience. Our study will therefore be based mainly on this letter to Pythicles. We shall supplement it from the letter to Herodotus, to which Epicurus himself refers in writing to Pythicles. First, it must not be supposed that any other goal but ataraxy and firm assurance can be attained from knowledge of the meteors, either taken as a whole or in part, just as from the other natural sciences. Our life does not need speculation and empty hypotheses, but that we should live without confusion. Just as it is the business of the study of nature in general to investigate the foundations of what is most important, so happiness lies also in knowledge of the meteors. In and for itself, the theory of setting and rising, of position and eclipse, contains no particular grounds for happiness. Only terror possesses those who see these things without understanding their nature and their principal causes. So far, only the precedence which the theory of the meteors is supposed to have over other sciences has been denied, and this theory has been placed on the same level as others. But the theory of the meteors is also specifically different in comparison both with the method of ethics and with other physical problems, for example, the existence of indivisible elements and the like, where only one explanation corresponds to the phenomena. For this is not the case with the meteors. There, 1 Ibid. X 85. In the first place, origin has no simple cause, and they have more than one category of essence corresponding to the phenomena. For the study of nature cannot be pursued in accordance with empty axioms and laws. It is constantly repeated that the meteors are not to be explained haplos simply absolutely, but poilachos in many ways. This also holds for the rising and setting of the sun and the moon, the waxing and waning of the moon, the semblance of a face on the moon, the changes of duration of day and night, and other celestial phenomena. How then is it to be explained? Every explanation is sufficient, only the myth must be removed. It will be removed when we observe the phenomena and draw conclusions from them concerning the invisible. We must hold fast to the appearance, the sensation, hence analogy must be applied. In this way we can explain fear away and free ourselves from it, by showing the causes of meteors and other things that are always happening and causing the utmost alarm to other people. Not the case with celestial phenomena. 4 Ibid. X 86. The great number of explanations, the multitude of possibilities should not only tranquilize our minds and remove causes for fear, but also at the same time negate in the heavenly bodies their very unity, the absolute law that is always equal to itself. These heavenly bodies may behave sometimes in one way, sometimes in another. This possibility conforming to no law is the characteristic of their reality. Everything in them is declared to be impermanent and unstable. The multitude of the explanations should, at the same time, remove the unity of the object. Thus, while Aristotle, in agreement with other Greek philosophers, considers the heavenly bodies to be eternal and immortal, because they always behave in the same way, while he even ascribes to them an element of their own, higher and not subjected to the force of gravity, Epicurus, in contrast, claims the direct opposite. He reasons that the theory of the meteors is specifically distinguished from all other physical doctrine in this respect, that in the meteors everything occurs in a multiple and unregulated way, that everything in them is to be explained by a manifold of indefinitely many causes. Yes, in wrath and passionate violence he rejects the opposite opinion, and declares that those who adhere to only one method of explanation to the exclusion of all others, those who accept something unique, the clear evidence available, as given by each of the standards of truth, hence eternal and divine in the meteors, fall victim to idle explanation-making and to the slavish artifices of the astrologers. They overstep the bounds of the study of nature and throw themselves into the arms of myth. They try to achieve the impossible and exert themselves over absurdities. They do not even realize where ataraxy itself becomes endangered. Their chatter is to be despised. We must avoid the prejudice that investigation into these subjects cannot be sufficiently thorough and subtle if it aims only at our own ataraxian bliss. On the contrary, it is an absolute law that nothing that can disturb ataraxy that can cause danger can belong to an indestructible 1 Ibid. X 98, whereas those who adopt only one explanation and eternal nature, consciousness must understand that this is an absolute law. Hence Epicurus concludes, since eternity of the heavenly bodies would disturb the ataraxy of self-consciousness, it is a necessary, astringent consequence that they are not eternal. But how can we understand this peculiar view of Epicurus? All authors who have written on Epicurean philosophy have presented this teaching as incompatible with all the rest of physics, with the atomic doctrine. The fight against the Stoics, against superstition, against astrology is taken as sufficient grounds. And we have seen that Epicurus himself distinguishes the method applied in the theory of the meteors from the method of the rest of physics. But in which definition of his principle can the necessity of this distinction be found? How does the idea occur to him? And he fights not only against astrology but also against astronomy itself, against eternal law and rationality in the heavenly system. Finally, opposition to the Stoics explains nothing. Their superstition and their whole point of view had already been refuted when the heavenly bodies were declared to be accidental complexes of atoms and their processes accidental motions of the atoms. Thereby their eternal nature was destroyed, a consequence which Democritus was content to draw from these premises. In fact, their very being was disposed of. The atomist therefore was in no need of a new method. But this is not yet the full difficulty. An even more perplexing antinomy appears. The atom is matter in the form of independence, of individuality, as it were the representative of weight. But the heavenly bodies are the supreme realization of weight. In them all antinomics between form and matter, between concept and existence, which constituted the development of the atom, are resolved. In them all required determinations are realized. The heavenly bodies are eternal and unchangeable. They have their center of gravity in, not outside themselves. Their only action is motion, and, separated by empty space, they swerve from the straight line and form a system of repulsion and attraction while at the same time preserving their own independence and also, finally, generating time out of themselves as the form of their appearance. The heavenly bodies are therefore the atoms become real. In them matter has received in itself individuality. Here Epicurus must therefore have glimpsed the highest existence of his principle, the peak and culminating point of his system. He asserted that he assumed the atom so that nature would be provided with immortal foundations. He alleged that he was concerned with the substantial individuality of matter. But when he comes upon the reality of his nature, and he knows no other nature but the mechanical, when he comes upon independent Indestructible matter in the heavenly bodies whose eternity and unchangeability were proved by the belief of the people, the judgment of philosophy, the evidence of the senses, then his one and only desire is to pull it down into earthly transience. He turns vehemently against those who worship an independent nature containing in itself the quality of individuality. This is his most glaring contradiction. Hence, Epicurus feels that here his previous categories break down, that the method of his theory becomes different. And the profoundest knowledge achieved by his system, its most thorough consistency, is that he is aware of this and expresses it consciously. Indeed, we have seen how the whole Epicurean philosophy of nature is pervaded with the contradiction between essence and existence, between form and matter. But this contradiction is resolved in the heavenly bodies, the conflicting moments are reconciled. In the celestial system, matter has received form into itself, has taken up the individuality into itself, and has thus achieved its independence. But at this point, it ceases to be affirmation of abstract self-consciousness. In the world of the atoms, as in the world of appearance, form struggled against matter, the one determination transcended the other, and precisely in this contradiction, abstract individual self-consciousness felt its nature objectified. The abstract form, which in the shape of matter fought against abstract matter, was this self-consciousness itself. But now, when matter has reconciled itself with the form and has been rendered self-sufficient, individual self-consciousness emerges from its pupation, proclaims itself the true principle, and opposes nature, which has become independent. All this can also be expressed from another point of view in the following way. Matter, having received into itself individuality, form, as is the case with the heavenly bodies, has ceased to be abstract individuality, it has become concrete individuality, universality. In the meteors, therefore, abstract individual self-consciousness is met by its contradiction, shining in its materialized form, the universal which has become existence and nature. Hence it recognizes in the meteors its deadly enemy, and it ascribes to them, as Epicurus does, all the anxiety and confusion of men. Indeed, the anxiety and dissolution of the abstract individual is precisely the universal. Here, therefore, Epicurus's true principle, abstract individual self-consciousness, can no longer be concealed. It steps out from its hiding place and, freed from material mummery, it seeks to destroy the reality of nature which has become independent by an explanation according to abstract possibility. What is possible may also be otherwise. The opposite of what is possible is also possible. Hence the polemic against those who explain the heavenly bodies, haplos, that is, in one particular way, for the one is the necessary and that which is independent in itself. Thus, as long as nature as atom and appearance expresses individual self-consciousness and its contradiction, the subjectivity of self-consciousness appears only in the form of matter itself. Where, on the other hand, it becomes independent, it reflects itself in itself, confronts matter in its own shape as independent form. It could have been said from the beginning that where Epicurus's principle becomes reality, it will cease to have reality for him. For if individual self-consciousness were posited in reality under the determination of nature, or nature under the determination of individual consciousness, then its determination, that is, its existence, would have ceased, because only the universal and free distinction from itself can know at the same time its own affirmation. In the theory of meteors, therefore, appears the soul of the Epicurean philosophy of nature. Nothing is eternal which destroys the ataraxy of individual self-consciousness. The heavenly bodies disturb its ataraxy, its equanimity with itself, because they are the existing universality, because in them nature has become independent. Thus, the principle of Epicurean philosophy is not the gastrology of Archestratus as Chrysippus believes, but the absoluteness and freedom of self-consciousness, even if self-consciousness is only conceived in the form of individuality. If abstract individual self-consciousness is posited as an absolute principle, then indeed all true and real science is done away with, inasmuch as individuality does not rule within the nature of things themselves. But then too, everything collapses that is transcendentally related to human consciousness and therefore belongs to the imagining mind. On the other hand, if that self-consciousness which knows itself only in the form of abstract universality is raised to an absolute principle, then the door is opened wide to superstitious and unfree mysticism. Stoic philosophy provides the historic proof of this. Abstract universal self-consciousness has indeed the intrinsic urge to affirm itself in the things themselves, in which it can only affirm itself by negating them. Epicurus is therefore the greatest representative of Greek enlightenment, and he deserves the praise of Lucretius. When human life lay groveling in all men's sight, crushed to the earth under the dead weight of religion whose grim features lowered menacingly upon mortals from the four quarters of the sky, a man of Greece was first to raise mortal eyes in defiance, first to stand erect and brave the challenge. Fables of the gods did not crush him, nor the lightning flash and growling menace of the sky. Therefore religion in its turn lies crushed beneath his feet, and we by his triumph are lifted level with the skies. The difference between democritean and epicurean philosophy of nature, which we established at the end of the general section, has been elaborated and confirmed in all domains of nature. In Epicurus, therefore, atomistics with all its contradictions has been carried through and completed as the natural science of self-consciousness. This self-consciousness under the form of abstract individuality is an absolute principle. Epicurus has thus carried atomistics to its final conclusion, which is its dissolution and conscious opposition to the universal. For Democritus, on the other hand, the atom is only the general objective expression of the empirical investigation of nature as a whole. Hence the atom remains for him a pure and abstract category, a hypothesis, the result of experience, not its active principle. This hypothesis remains therefore without realization, just as it plays no further part in determining the real investigation of nature. Draft of new preface. The treatise that I herewith submit to the public is an old piece of work and was originally intended as part of a comprehensive exposition of Epicurean, Stoic, and skeptic philosophy. At present, however, political and philosophical arrangements of an entirely different kind prevent me from bringing such a task to completion. Only now the time has come in which the systems of the Epicurean, Stoics, and skeptics can be understood. They are the philosophers of self-consciousness. These lines will at any rate show how little has so far been achieved towards solving the problem.